Hello and welcome to Tabletop Game Shop speed painting video, where I'm going to be talking through some of the techniques that I use that will enable you to paint squads of models or multiple models in maybe an hour and a half, which doesn't include drying time for things like washes. So we'll get things started. I'm working on Gene Stealers. As you can see, I have them undercoated already. I use Zandri Dust Spray, which gives a nice, very neutral colour that I can work with, that I found works incredibly well with lots of different colours. So even if you're not doing the colour scheme that I'm using here, and you're doing something different, it will still work in exactly the same way using these methods. So the first thing I'll be doing is I'll be using Pallid Witch Flesh, a very versatile paint colour. I'll be creating highlights that we'll be using washes to bring out a bit later on. We're using a large dry brush, one of my favourite brushes. You can work fairly fast with this. So getting some paint out. I'm not really going for like the actual dry brush technique, so I'm not taking all of the paint off the brush. In fact, I leave, depending on the effect that I want, I'll leave maybe a little bit, but in this instance, quite a bit. I'm going for a heavy, you can see here, a very heavy kind of feel to what's happening when I run the brush over it. So not really being particularly neat and tidy, although using a downward stroke so it will pick the highlight points of the model. So I'm not just slapping it all over without any care and attention, but I'm not too worried about how this part looks. This is just setting the model ready for the paint or the wash. We'll be using quite a lot of wash techniques to make this happen. So you can see here, just slapping it on. So when we compare the models, you can see the difference now. You can see how this is picking up on the highlighted areas. So that's all done. Next thing is get my shade brush. That's seen better days. I use this for pretty much everything, and pick the colour scheme. So I'm trying to match them up to these guys that I've got on the go as well. So kind of that pink and green feel. So to get the pinky effect, I'm using Carroburg Crimson. Again, whatever colour you want, this will work if you use the washes. So if you wanted purple, then use a purple wash, or yellow, use a yellow wash. That will work. And then again, I'm finding the areas that I want to be pink, and here we go. Again, straight from the pot. So the very technical, really good painters will probably be shouting down now, don't use it straight from the pot, put it on your palette, all that kind of stuff. But I find when speed painting, you can ignore some of that advice. Obviously, if you're going for real fine techniques in your painting, you definitely want to follow the advice of some great tutorials out there for painting. But this is about getting your model up and ready for the battlefield. It won't really stand up to a lot of close scrutiny. It's about seeing them as a mob, really. So I'll just, again, quite neatly, think of it like colouring in. I don't want to splash all over the place. We could do this faster and then maybe try and fix mistakes later on, but I like to keep it in the areas that it's actually going to be, so not too much spillover. So when I'm creating this wash point, you can see I'm pushing it inwards towards the edges rather than coming outwards. So that's one of the techniques I use to make sure I can keep within the lines. So you see I'm pushing it in there. And you can see already from the model how that's working out. So the Pallid Witch Flesh is creating a highlight. So it means I don't really need to go back and highlight this model. I mean, obviously you could do if you wanted to, but I find that in most cases I don't really bother with the highlight for the rank and file kind of models. Obviously, character models, I would probably put a little bit more work in. I say probably. I always mean to go back and do more work, and a new model appears. So yeah, one guy down. Let's get the rest going. This guy's got some little gribbly bits hanging down, so I'll probably make those green later on, rather than pink. I do wish I could paint this fast though. It would be amazing, wouldn't it? Maybe with a little bit of practice. Okay, so left the washes to dry, so that takes a little bit of time. And I do recommend checking that each part is dry, so that you're not gonna have colours bleed into other colours. That can ruin it. But you can see even now they're looking alright. Well, for me, I'm happy with them. So onto the green, using Wag Flesh, and I want to create a wash. So I'm using that wash brush again, or the shade brush. So what I'm doing is I'm going to get the paint out onto the palette. So here I'm actually using the palette, and then water this down. But I use quite a lot now in terms of the water, because I want this to be really wet. So it's going to act like a wash. So plenty of water in here, because it's the paint going into the recesses, covering over that Xandri dust and leaving the pallid witch flesh, that takes away a lot of the extra work of the highlights, which for speed painting means you can take a whole step away from the model, really. And as I do this now, push the paint in. So again, I'm going into the areas, and not always putting the paint on the edges. You can see how it's the edges are fairly light. Just thicken that paint up a little bit more, because maybe a little bit wet. So yeah, making sure, pushing right down into the recesses there to give it the shade, so that it'll really make it pop later on. I could probably have done a bit more with the green. I just wanted to get these done. I wanted the colours on, so I'm just putting it onto the carapace part here. Maybe I'll do a little bit of the bits that's on their forehead. Might have been nice to highlight some of the arm plates in green. Again, if I wanted to take a little bit more time, maybe that's what I would do in the future with some of my Gene Stealers. But for now, I'm pretty happy with how they're coming out. So you can see the effect is already starting to come through from a distance, but I'm going to deepen the green now with Celia Green shade. So actually going into a shade now, so again I can get the shade brush. I can come straight from the pot as well again, so nice and thick. But this is where I'll push it. I will just leave it right in the dark points. So just pushing it in there, just to give it a little bit more contrast, because there's not really a sharp highlight on this technique. So there, I'm pushing it right into the central point there to create that contrast. If you want sharper highlights, you can highlight, of course, later on. I'll talk about that in a little while, what we can do, what I'll do with some of the highlighting. But for now, just getting that wash in there, let the washes do the work. That's really the technique that we're talking about here. So there he is, or there she is, who knows. There it is. There we go. Give that a little bit of time to dry. Actually, one of the things I do whilst waiting for some of the stuff to dry, if it's out of the way, that wash is, I'm unlikely to mess up now whilst messing with the model. So what I'll do is I'll start working on the base. So I'm just using the texture tool here to put the stuff on. I don't know why I put the pot over there. I mean, that's just make it more difficult for myself. I'm not even moving the pot. Why wouldn't I move the pot? I mean, that's just ridiculous. I guess because you have a camera in front of you. It's actually quite hard to paint if you've ever tried working with a camera in front of you. And there we go. So, there we go. I'm moving the pot. Good. So basing them up, ready. Yeah, I'm putting the first layer of the base on, the Martian Iron Earth, I think it's called. So yeah, just getting them ready, and that again, a little bit of time there, and that gives some of the shade chance to dry. So Reichland Flesh Shade next, and I'm going to use this for the bony parts. And I use Reichland Flesh Shade because I've got this kind of pink reddish colour. So if I went in with something like an Agrax Earth shade straight away, it would probably go a bit muddy. So I still want the models to look fairly nice, and I want the colours to be working well together. So Reichland Flesh Shade has a nice reddish tint to it. So I'm going to use that first. I'm still going to come back and deepen up some of the shading on this afterwards. But for now, this allows me to blend in the kind of the pink through to the bone, and some of those areas where I was not so neat a little bit earlier on can now be covered up. So again, good speed painting technique there. Try and cover up some of the messy bits a little bit later on. So don't worry about them too early on if it's a bit messy. You can always come back and fix it. A little blob of paint here and there. Works wonders. Good advice for life. There we go. That's all done. So I just need to get the rest of them done. Base is still a little bit wet, of course, because I'm working straight through here, not really giving it a chance to dry. And again, I'm staying away from the green, so I can work on this whilst waiting for the green to dry. So again, if you want to get these done fairly quick, you don't want to wait for stuff to dry, you could be working on other parts of the model at the same time. So that's them done. Again, another little thing I can do now, get my fist on red. That's seen better days. So just putting in the red on their tongues. Now, sometimes I like to try and get a little bit of blending going on. So just maybe rub some paint off. You can see me doing that technique there, and then changing my mind and just making the whole thing red. It probably didn't require any extra work than that. So I probably took a lot longer on that tongue than I would on any other tongue. There we go. They are now ready to go to the next stage, which is just continuing on with the base for now, whilst waiting for some of those other bits to dry. And I'm using the Astro Granite and the little tool again. And here I'm just blobbing the Astro Granite over the top, again without much care and attention, just scraping it on like I'm putting on some kind of paste onto bread or something. Oh, you all have grey paste on bread, right? Okay, so yeah, just spread it on, leaving some of the red showing, of course, on those. And that'll be ready for the next stage in a little while. And they're nearing completion now. Pretty happy with how they're looking. I like the colour scheme. You can see that they look like they've got a bit of highlight on them, but I haven't actually done any highlight. I'm now going in with the Agrax. Agrax, the great, wonderful Agrax Earthshade, fixes many a mistake, does wonderful things. If you haven't used it, put it on anything. It will pretty much make anything look good after you've painted it. Base coat, Agrax, done. So I'm using this for the darker shade, of course, coming in now on that bony stuff. And also going over the hands, so again that's tying it all together. Any bony bits now. Pop a little bit of Agrax. Again, you can see I'm not being too neat here. I'm just blobbing it in the general area, but I'm not pulling it all the way to the edge. I'm pushing it backwards into the recesses, so it still leaves the lighter point towards the edge of the bone. Although, again, I'm not going to worry too much about that. So if you do happen to, splodge it a little bit, don't worry, we can fix that in post-production. So there you go, Agraxed up, letting that all dry. Go back to the base now, because obviously I want the whole thing to be finished at the same time. So I'm going to null oil all across the base. This is going to draw those colours together, so that you can see now that it's going to darken everything up. The red won't be quite so bright. It'll add a little bit of uniformity to the base. It looks a lot darker on the video than it appears in real life, really. There we go. So null oil all over. So let's get that slapped on. Quite like this stage. It's cathartic and relaxing. Just slapping null oil all over everything. Fairly quick. Okay, leaving that to dry. Of course, coming back to this now. The Pallid Witch flesh is coming back out. Now, this is where I do a little bit of highlighting. I'm mainly focusing on the base now, so making sure that we can get a little bit of definition onto the edge of the base. So I'm going more for the dry brush now, so a smaller brush, taking most of the paint off, as you can see, and I'm just going to draw it and drag it around the edges a little bit, nice and light. So that's just going to pop the edge of the base a little bit, so that again gives it a little bit of definition, so it's not just a black base with a little bit of red showing. Also getting in there on the tips of the bony parts, so you can see there where there may have been a little bit of spread of the wash that's made it look a little bit weird. I can now just blend that back in a little bit, so if somebody did pick them up, they're not going to scream in horror. And there it is, a little bit of highlighting, a bit more on this again. You don't have to do this. Sometimes I feel like putting a bit more work into the model even when I'm speed painting. I always think I'll go back and do more on them. Never going to happen. Too many other models. Finally, Abaddon Black. Get my trusty old shade brush again. Use it for everything except eyes, although sometimes eyes. Depends how big they are. And this is just for the edge of the base now. Just colouring it back in again, and that'll make it nice and neat. And you see that the highlight on the base pops a little bit more now when you get that edge on, which again is difficult to see on the video. Probably see it better on the photos, and definitely in the flesh. Come and have a look at them. I don't always do my bases this colour. You can do them any colour, of course. Sometimes I go for a light edge, nice brown. It's entirely up to you. I'm not suggesting you follow these colour schemes. It's about the techniques that I'm using to allow you to get the models finished and painted, ready to get them onto the battlefield and played with. So that's it really. They are complete, and here's some photos so you can see what they look like. Again, they don't stand up to close scrutiny. You can see a little bit of splashes of paint on his head there. These are some of the other guys. I've finished these up at the same time, so whilst I was waiting for something to dry, bits to dry, I was working on those. Different colour schemes, same techniques. And here they are on the battlefield, which is a bit that I'm interested in. How are they going to look when they're all out there coming to rip your face off? Thank you for watching. Hope you've enjoyed that. Let me know if you want to see more.